Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razam Pereira. Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Wednesday invited global businesses to invest in India, saying historic reduction in corporate tax rates by his government creates a golden opportunity and promised more measures to improve business climate. Speaking at the Bloomberg Global Business Forum, the Prime Minister said India offers a golden opportunity for investment in the country. If you want to invest in a market where there is scale, come to India. If you want to invest in startups with a huge market, come to India. If you want to invest in one of the world's largest infrastructure ecosystem, come to India, he told global corporates. Prime Minister Modi also listed the 4D factors: democracy, demography, demand and decisiveness that makes India reliable and a unique destination for investors. Earlier this month, the government had reduced the effective corporate tax rate to 25% from nearly 35%, thus bringing India at par with major global economies on the taxation front. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the investment sentiment. Joining me on the program today are Jayant Das Gupta, former Secretary, Economic Advisory Council, Prime Minister of India; Bhanuchandar Nagarajan, former consultant, the World Bank, Washington, D.C., and A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director of the Business Standard. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Bhattacharya, I'd like to begin the program with you. Your thoughts on the Prime Minister's speech to the CEOs to invest in India and about the climate for investment as a whole?
Well, I think the pitch is very reasonable, realistic as well. It's based on a decision that was taken last Friday by the Finance Ministry. An ordinance was issued wherein the tax rates were significantly reduced, and more importantly, the maze of exemptions were sought to be removed by making the Indian taxation system far more transparent and far less dependent on discretion and far less prone to litigation. In a sense that companies that wished to avail themselves of a lower rate of taxation of 22% of basic tax, 10% of surcharge and 4% of cess, amounting to 25.17%, would have to give up all the exemptions. So it is like saying that you may have 28 different exemptions which you are availing yourself of, but if you want to get out of this maze, come clean and clear, here is a lower taxation incentive for you. Pay up 25.17% and be done with it. And that rate is pretty comparable to the rates that prevail in other Asian economies in particular. Now, I think that's the headline message. But I think real message in that announcement was about the new companies, and particularly the new manufacturing companies that were to set shop in India after 1st of October 2019, wherein the tax rate, the corporation tax rate, was to come down to 15%. And 15% is a tax rate that is even right now is as good, as attractive as that prevails in Singapore or in Hong Kong, if you take into account the surcharge and cess. After surcharge and cess, it comes to 17% or so, and exactly the Hong Kong and the Singapore tax rates are the same. Thailand and Vietnam have of course reduced the rates recently to 10% to attract investment from the US. But I think on the whole, the broad message that the Prime Minister's Finance Minister issued before he left for the US was that the tax rates, corporation tax rates, are now as competitive as anywhere in the world. Now, having said that, there is a lot more that needs to be done.
Sure,
This is the basic framework on which the foreign investor can actually look forward to coming to India and set up shop and take advantage of a more friendly tax structure. And one more point, what it does is that since India is now getting into a regional comprehensive economic partnership treaty, now it gives us in the Indian economy an opportunity of getting a lot of investment from Europe and the US to come and set up shop here and probably explore the Chinese market, which they will not be able to explore without the RCEP benefits. So it's a attraction to those companies who wish to come to India and use the RCEP. So once your taxation structure is very attractive, so you can actually take advantage of the RCEP facilities also. And this tax cut, to my mind, is a kind of an invitation to the global companies that wish to invest in India.
Sure. So that having been said, Banu, I'd like to bring you in here now. So as far as bringing down the corporation tax is concerned, how much of a lure is it for foreign investors to come in now and invest in India?
As the Prime Minister was making his pitch to foreign investors, I was reminded of this Rajasthan tourism ad, Padaro Mare Desh. Okay, so in fact, he almost made a campaign speech. He said, come to India way too many times in the same speech. It's almost like a campaign rhetoric. Having said that, the Prime Minister in fact insisted on what is the structural advantages of India, what is good about India in the long term. He talked about demography, democracy, rule of law, and the infrastructure creation that we are embarking on, so on and so forth. So most of Prime Minister's speech was reiterating the structural advantages that India has. He has already delivered on the short term, which is the corporate tax rate cut, which Mr. Bhattacharya talked about. It was timed quite well. It was done last Friday before all the big meetings that were supposed to happen this week. So having delivered on the short term and reiterating what is good about India over the long term for global corporates, the Prime Minister made probably a total 360-degree pitch on why they should invest in India. He actually spoke about like 2,000 hospitals that are going to be built. He talked about the realty sector. He talked about food processing. And so like all of this was a great all-encompassing pitch to the investors. But having said that, like just like a month ago, people were commentariat were using the C word, the crisis word. Probably Rajya Sabha TV is one of those sane channels in which like we didn't go hyperbole about it. But many channels you spoke about, they were actually talking about as if India was going through a crisis. So now, like, you know, the things were turned around just by a simple tax cut. So I think like the sentiment has improved quite tremendously. And we have also politically handled the Kashmir issue very well. So that also adds to the kitty. So I think like now we can look forward to some solid focus on the economy and hoping we deliver on this tax cut, and like there is more rate cuts coming from the RBI side. I think we are in for at least a short-term bull ride going forward.
Okay, all right. So, Mr. Dasgupta, what is it that MNCs look for when they want to invest in India, and are we in a position to provide that conducive atmosphere or that conducive environment for them now?
The first thing which an MNC would look at would of course be the size of the market, the predictability and certainty about policies remaining in place, the environment under which they invest, that should remain for a long period of time. That gives them that certainty. Then of course the tax rate is extremely important, because if it is competitive, they get to make more profits and repatriate profits, which is of course something which they have to show to their shareholders. So it's extremely important. And finally, the ease of doing business, which not only means that they can set up shop quickly, they can get the land, they can get the electricity, environmental clearances, other clearances, but also if there is a problem with the contracts, enforcement of contracts, it will get resolved quickly. Now that is one parameter on which we have still lagged behind, and I think there was a report some time ago about the enforcement of contracts. India stands perhaps 167th in the world in terms of that parameter. So that is something which we need to bring up to speed. But as the Prime Minister yesterday mentioned on providing electricity connections and many other parameters, we have improved considerably in the past few years, and since last year as well. The last point which the PM stressed was that he would act as a go-to person between the investors and a state agency, or to sort out problems that the investor may face. That is a huge assurance, I think, coming from the Prime Minister of a country as large as India. And the way he has carried out his promises, it will definitely be very attractive to potential investors. And I may add that the US-China trade war, and that seems to be going on, and it doesn't seem that it will get resolved in the near term, that is till November next year, when the presidential election in the US takes place. So many large corporations, MNCs, are already looking at opportunities to invest in other countries which have a large market, which can provide an ecosystem for them to prosper, to flourish, and which also has a large domestic market. So India, in those terms, I think will be very, very attractive for foreign investors at this juncture. And this is one huge, I think, structural reform that has taken place. Of course, there are other areas like labor and certain other aspects which also have to be gone into.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Bhattacharya, so what are the sectors that are likely to get a boost or a fillip thanks to the Prime Minister's pitch to the global CEOs?
Well, I think if you look at the areas where investments, fresh investments can take place, clearly infrastructure is an area where huge unmet demand, and I would imagine that setting up infrastructure would be classified under a manufacturing classification for taxation purposes, and that will get a tax rate of 15 plus 10% surcharge and 4% cess, which is 17%. So I think that is one area one can expect a lot of action there. Then there is a huge area of defense manufacturing in this country. The defense demands are well known. There is a huge unmet demand. There is a backlog of procurement that are waiting to happen. And once the defense manufacturers, the defense players abroad are convinced that, as Mr. Dasgupta pointed out, a stable, certain policy framework prevails and political stability is there, and if you have a tax rate which is attractive, they would like to shift their base for meeting the India demand from here. And if this policy is supplemented with a proper realistic exchange rate policy, then India will have a double benefit, because they will come to India and from here add value, and then India can become the export hub for a large number of markets. But if you do not have a proper sort of market linked exchange rate policy, what may happen is that we will be probably suffering from the Dutch disease, where too much of money coming in and lying in the RBI reserves, and RBI finding it very difficult to reduce the value or depreciate the rupee adequately to make sure that the Indian exports don't become uncompetitive. Right. So I think you need, you will see investments in infrastructure sector, you will see a lot of investment in defense, you will see a lot of investment in some of the areas, particularly in the services sector. And remember that what the tax policy has done now is that they have given the option to service companies who were earlier going in for MAT to go in straight for a MAT without any other regulatory hurdles, so to say. A lot of service companies were having problems in establishing their claims under MAT. Now the MAT thing has been simplified. As a matter of fact, if you are a new company, you don't even need to go for MAT. You're going to go straight for a 17% rate and go for it. So my sense is that you will see a boost in investment in in manufacturing, like infrastructure sector. You will see a boost in defense. You will see a boost in services. And many of the telecom sector, for example, the huge 5G thing. For example, the companies like Apple, Foxconn, they will be now too glad to come. But as I said, two issues. One is the exchange rate policy need to be kept in mind, and two would be that what we are doing in terms of our factor market reforms. Are we taking those factor market reforms forward? And second is, what are we doing to make sure that India continues and even betters in production of competent labor force.
Right.
We have a shortage there. Our schools and colleges need to go a long way forward in producing productive, value-adding employees for world-class factories in this country. I think that area still needs greater focus, because you may have lots of engineering colleges, but you will see the latest survey, there is a shortfall in engineers in this country right now, because people are not going for engineering courses anymore. The seats are lying vacant.
Sure.
But then you need to improve your educational skills, you need to improve your markets, you need to improve your exchange rate, you need to improve your factor market reforms, and you need to, of course, you have done the bit that was required for the taxation rate. So
Right.
I'm pretty hopeful that not in the short term. Now these benefits were not going to flow in tomorrow.
Right.
These are medium to long term benefits.
Absolutely.
So if someone were to say that, oh, this did not result in higher investment in the next 6 months, I think it will be giving the policy a bad name and then hang it.
Right.
I think to see the benefits of this result, you have to wait for at least a year and a half, 2 years to see the actual incremental benefit to the economy and indeed to the tax collections of this government. My reading is the government should not worry about whatever tax shortfall that arises because of this policy, because essentially what these benefits are largely are neutralized by the phase out of exemptions.
Absolutely.
In a sense, if you have lost 1.45 lakh crore of revenues, you are also saving on 1 lakh crore of exemptions that you are spending on. So your net outgo is only around 45,000 crore.
Sure.
So what you need to worry about is how do you increase and widen the basket to make sure that more people come under the tax net and economic growth booms and you collect more money. So over a period of 2 years, you will see the results of this policy that was announced last Friday.
Okay, all right. So Banu, as far as what has been done so far, what are the key highlights, for you as far as the last 2 or 3 years are concerned? Because as far as ease of doing business as well, we've gone up in the rankings. So what is it that stands out for you?
Actually, like quite a few things. In fact, the government has actually set the platform for this growth to happen. There has been a mass program on providing safety net to our people, like whether in terms of the Krishi Samman Nidhi or the Ayush scheme or the expansion of scholarships and the focus on higher education reforms and school education reforms. So all of this is actually kind of setting up the platform for the growth to happen and to be equitable. So it is not that like we grow to a $5 trillion economy with a Gini coefficient of 50 or 0.5, right? So I think that was probably one of the laudable things that actually the previous government did, and I think they will continue as well. Like the Mudra loans. There's a gamut of social security measures that were taken. So I think so that is going to help. Keep us in good stead. But those reforms are not over yet. Like we have to still educate our people better. Gender parity has improved. Like the recent higher education survey said that like the number for the gender parity in higher education is 1, which is nice. Like the number of women is equal to the number of men that are attending higher education institutions. So all of this has to continue. As Mr. Bhattacharya was saying, like the expansion of infrastructure, which is actually going to make give access to people that are in remote areas, like connect them to the main market, or give them access to public services. That has to improve. That is an ongoing process. So I think like and housing. So like the focus on housing, health, the road infrastructure and rail infrastructure, and on human capital, the factor markets per se. So all of this, which was taken up at a very good level during the previous government, have to be continued, and it is actually also part of the BJP's manifesto. So I'm assuming that they are still going to keep the foot on the pedal.
Right.
So hopefully, like all of this will kind of converge and like make this $5 trillion economy dream possible.
Sure. So, Mr. Dasgupta, on the other side of all of this is, of course, the fact that the consumer demand hasn't picked up. How do we address that, and what needs to be done there?
There are quite a few things which perhaps could be done. One of the things is, of course, that we need to implement the government schemes in a much more rapid fashion. For instance, the Kisan Samman Nidhi, which was supposed to provide 6,000 rupees per annum to farmers, all farmers. Now, only the first installment for the current year has probably been released, and that too not in all states. So that would give a significant boost to the incomes of people, because initially it was calculated that about 88,000 crores would get transferred to the hands of the farmers. So that is one. The second thing is about providing employment to the landless labor and to the people who work on the farms, do not own land. So that would mean a boost to Narega spending, and then fast tracking the expenditure on, for instance, the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, both in the rural areas and in the urban areas. And then supporting schemes like Ajivika, and generally now that the banks have been recapitalized to the extent of some 70,000 crores, they would have much more liquidity in their hands. So some kind of monitoring mechanism has to be put in place so that more money flows into the rural economy, and that will give a boost to consumption in the rural areas, which will enable knock-on effect, and that will in fact provide a great boost to consumption all over the country.
Right. All right. Closing comments now from all my guests, starting first with you, Mr. Bhattacharya, with what more needs to be done and what's the best way forward?
Well, I entirely agree with what Mr. Dasgupta said, that we need to focus on schemes like the PM Kisan, but I would go a step further and address the concerns of the informal economy. Remember that the informal economy was the one that was hit very hard, first by demonetization and then by the GST. And I think the informal economy is still to come back to the shape and state of activity that it prevailed before November 2016. And I think it is very important that the informal sector's woes and problems need to be looked at afresh. And I am including here even the tiny and small enterprises which were till recently were quite happy with the kind of loans that they were getting. And please remember that they are going to repay those loans very soon. One step the government has taken by extending the timeline for their recognizing as non-performing assets, but that to my mind in my view is only a palliative. You need to look at the informal sector economy's problems. You need to look at the MSME sector's problems, because that is a sector which can actually help revive demand in a short term. And if the MSME sector's problems and the informal economy's problems can be tackled, then I would say that in the short and the medium term, the demand side of the economy will get some relief. And after a year or so, with this kind of the supply side measures that have been taken, mainly through the tax rate cut, will probably help us see better days.
Right. All right, Panu?
The economic survey actually talks about increasing the investment to GDP ratio from 30 to 35. So we are actually looking at an investment driven GDP economy. For that, to that goal, the Prime Minister's visit has been very fruitful. He is actually trying to bring foreign money to all of our development needs and the growth needs. Also, it clearly addresses in a very timely manner the geopolitical conflicts that are happening in trade. So I think it has been a very successful visit, both in terms of the geopolitical and geo-economic point of view. Hopefully, like our government and our bureaucratic system is able to execute a lot of these things and actually able to roll out the red carpet for the investors.
All right. And Mr. Das Gupta, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
One of the things which has been emphasized by the Prime Minister is infrastructure spending and foreign investors coming in. Now, there are sectors like oil, gas and mining, including coal, which I think are getting liberalized, and the stage is going to be set to attract investment. So that is going to be key, to attract investments in roads, ports, railways, mining, because that will give a great boost to spending and to put money in the hands of the working class.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.